Good evening, CypherCon. How you doing out there? Having a good time? I was not at CypherCon last time, and I regret it. This has been great. I love the villages. That's probably my favorite part out there. So I'm going to blaze through this stuff so we can get on with the rest of the presentations and get back out to the villages. And who's doing the wireless CTF?
Right here.
Yeah? Are you winning?
Yes.
Good for you? Not me?
Team, not me.
Oh, okay. It's a team effort.
It's a team effort.
Good for you. Well, my name is Shannon Fritz, and I want to talk to you a little bit about Cybersecurity Starter Kit, how to talk to your businesses about improving security. I work for a company called Concurrency, and there I'm a solutions architect. My job is to basically come up with new solutions for our customers. And lately, it's been about security, right? Security is everywhere. I have a security background, which is pretty convenient. I also am an enterprise security MVP, which, if you haven't heard about the MVP program, that's probably because it's a Microsoft thing, and that's not very popular over here. But we talk with businesses who run Windows and Windows servers, and in the enterprise security program, I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of people inside of Microsoft about the products and solutions that they work with, and help them with feedback from our customers and do improvements on how those things work. So at Concurrency, we basically help customers transform their businesses by investing more in the products that they already own, doing better deployments and configurations of those tools. And when it comes to security, the conversations that I have with our customers oftentimes come down to, I don't know what to do. You know, I know that we're at risk. I know that we need to do something better, but I'm not totally sure where to start. And some of those businesses, frankly, don't have the budget or the staff to deal with it. And so what they're coming to us with is this question of, like, what should we do? It feels pretty ambiguous. And so what I wanted to do is put together a couple of slides and presentation on how to deal with that. So I want to give you some examples that you can take back to the businesses, talk with the people there about what they can do, and actually give you some examples that you can take back. I also want to show you 4 areas that I think that you could immediately start making changes in the business based on attacks that I think taking some mitigation steps will help improve the security very quickly. So if you've seen Information is Beautiful, they do a good job of showing a lot of data in a pretty way. This shows records, this shows breaches that have resulted in a loss of 30,000 records or more. And in just the last 2 years, there's so many of them that it's basically just a big blob on the screen. And if we switch the coloring to show the kinds of breaches that occur on here, the pink ones are basically all hacks, right? Deliberate circumventions of security to steal these records. And this tells me that it's not necessarily someone just being lazy and configuring something in an open way. It oftentimes is because of that, right? Somebody did something wrong and it's very easy to circumvent a system. But the deliberate hacks is the things that people are really concerned about, and rightly so, right? And afterwards, when the companies have been hitting the headlines and they find out that, yeah, we've been breached and we lost a bunch of stuff, this is what I think they feel like, right? I don't really want to feel this way. My customers don't want to feel this way. So I think that we need to start doing something about it. And what we can do is first realize that, yeah, we can do better than what we are doing. And I think a lot of times there's a shame associated with that realization, right? Like, oh man, our security is really bad. Let's not talk about it. Maybe it'll go away. And so many times that head in the sand, that turtling, is what companies have been doing, and it's starting to catch up with us. So once you can admit that you can do better, you can then realize that we can always do better, and there's nothing really wrong with the fact that you can do better. You know, if you have a company with no security practice, then maybe it's time to start one. If you already have a security practice, then you can probably still build on that. So when you start taking this path, you have to kind of stop talking about it and start doing it, right? You need to make a plan and start executing against it. So when you're starting out, you really want to build a team. You want to involve people, because if it's you at your desk knowing that security sucks and you don't talk to people about it, you're not going to do anything about it, right? And you need to make sure you involve the right people. You need to involve not only the IT folks, because IT is not the only aspect of security. We're talking about business process. We're talking about the implementations of the products that you're delivering. We're talking about culture in the organization. All of those commit or contribute to the security culture of the organization. And rather than just starting from scratch and figuring this all out on your own, you should really stand on the shoulders of giants, right? You can find frameworks out there like the NIST CSF that is a really good reference for the kinds of things that you can pay attention to. So if you look at the NIST CSF, it has this cycle of things that you can go through to improve security. We're talking about identifying things in your organization that represent risk. You know, is there a certain state of a product in your organization that's wrong? Is it a process you do? Do you make a bad practice of doing wire transfers without, without securing that information? And then how do you protect that asset? Is there, configurations and firewalls? Is there certificates? What can you do to secure or to protect it? And if something goes wrong, how do you detect that? And once it goes wrong, how do you respond to it? Who do you need to call to bring in to either get those services back online? Who has to deal with public relations? Right? So there's a whole myriad of things that you need to deal with for each of these, including recovery. And once you can do the recovery, sometimes that means not just bringing the services back online, but also kind of repairing your image, right? So there's a whole variety of things that it gets involved with the security practice. But the NIST CSF itself is not a standard, right? It's not something that you're going to go and become CSF certified. It is based on standards. So if you're trying to meet standards for things like audits, the NIST CSF references most of those kinds of standards and gives direct guidance on the things to do to meet those standards. But the nice thing is that it's not really specific to any industry. Right, it was originally created to help protect critical infrastructure, right? Things like the power grid and things that the country needed to stay afloat, not just the business. But the recommendations that are inside the frameworks are still relevant to multiple industries. So to get specific, we basically have to call out what we're concerned with. What is it that has us up at night? What is it that we think is really at risk? It's a good place to start because it probably means there's something that that needs to be done. And when you realize what it is, you can start calling out why it's bad. What is it that would go, or what would happen to the business if this thing was exploited? And start making out that list. And once you have a list of things that you're concerned with, really start with the little things, the low-hanging fruit, the things that you can start making that small incremental change that is a measurable thing. You really want to be able to demonstrate improvement. Not just a gut feeling that something is better, but something tangible. Because once you can start seeing a past series of improvements, you can start really seeing that trend going through the business to start making things better. And if you're not sure where to start, this might be a list of things to consider. If you're a service provider, look at denial of service attacks and botnets. Like if you are providing services on a web portal, could you handle the Internet of Things turning on you, right? Like what happened with DNS. Is it possible that someone in your organization could be tricked by social engineering? I would think that everybody would agree, yeah, it's very possible, whether that's through a malicious email attachment, or maybe it's somebody with a nice-looking badge that walks up and says, hey, I'm the IT guy, and I need to update the certificates on your computer. Can I just plug this in real quick? Is it possible that someone in your organization would believe that and let that happen? It's very likely in many organizations. And ransomware, if you did get a malicious payload and it were to go through and give you some CryptoLocker or Locky or something, is it likely to spread and cause damage to the business? And if it did, how could you come back from it? Do you have a plan? And credential theft. This is the one that I think is by and large the most well-known problem in most businesses today, is related to credential theft. So, among these things, insider threats are real, right? But when you're starting a security practice, I would really recommend you do not start there. Does anyone know why you wouldn't start with an insider threat? Why I would say that? It's a big room. Nobody wants to say. I would say not to start with an insider threat because if you are beginning a security practice, first you're going to make mistakes. Right? You haven't done it before, so you're going to be figuring it out. And because of that, you don't want the first mistake to be you saying, hey, IT guy, I don't trust you to stay out of my email. And I don't trust you to stay out of the stuff you shouldn't be in. You don't want to put out that sense of non-trust, right? You want to make sure that you're building an organization of trust, good relationships, and you start with the people that have the administrative rights and the power in the organization to make these changes. And those are the people you inherently trust right now. And they're not the ones that we need to defend against, at least at the outset. Right. Eventually, you can start looking at the risk of insider threats, but in the beginning, you could start making improvements very easily that address the external threats. Eventually, once you start getting better at it and you have an actual security practice with standards and stuff in place, then you can start looking at some of the insider things. But in the beginning, it's not a great place to start because you're going to foster that mistrust in the organization. You really want to build a team inside. So for specific things to look at related to those kinds of risks and threats, you might look at things like your network. Make sure that the network is segmented in a way that if I jump on your wireless network from the parking lot, I can't connect directly to the domain controllers. Like, it's probably a good idea, but that doesn't happen very often. That segmentation doesn't always exist. Bad and poor and common configurations, right? If you just go through and do the quick, lazy installation, oftentimes that leaves it open for backdoors and other kinds of things. So just looking at the kinds of products and solutions and tools you have in place, as well as, other services you subscribe to, making sure the configurations have some security oversight. If you're a development shop and you're building applications or services, are you using APIs or protocols that are old? Are you able to keep up with them? If you're using like OpenSSL, are you still, able to get hit by, some of the Heartbleed or something like that? Taking a look at those libraries, and patching is kind of an obvious one that we think of, but many times I go in organizations that don't really have a strict method of doing the deployments. We kind of do it quarterly. We kind of do it when we get around to it. If a patch happens to get installed, then I guess it gets installed. We try to RDP to everything and do it manually. That's not a good way to manage patches, and it causes lots and lots of problems because exploiting those kinds of vulnerabilities is not that hard anymore, right? I mean, this is probably the right room to ask. Has anybody heard of Metasploit? Right? How easy is it to inject in a payload in a vulnerability, right? You go to the library, you choose it, and then you deploy it. So patching is actually a very big deal that people think that it will be fine because we'll just go to Service Pack 2 or something. But it's a terrible idea. And excessive privileges is another very big one to look at because it's very easy to just start giving domain admin rights to every service account because it just probably needs it or at least gets me over the hump. And then they leave it as that. And if you can find a service account running as a service on a machine, like that is a gold mine, right? You can just jump on that box, steal the creds, and you're done. You just won. And credential management falls into that too. If you are not doing a good job on allowing users to do things like manage their own passwords and use credentials or require credentials that are harder to crack, then we've been talking about that all day. Once you've gone through this list and you've started building out things like, the services that are in your environment you need to take care of, start making a literal list. This list, one of the most important columns on here is actually that owner column. If you can define the owners of the service in your organization, that is going to drive progress. If you say, well, IT owns this, or finance owns this, nobody's going to be responsible for it, and nobody's going to have to answer when the timeline slips. So this is about accountability and making sure that you set realistic goals and you have somebody who can make a decision. Now, I'm not saying it's empirical, right? You're not going to go and just say, this is how it is because I own it. You still probably have to get buy-in, right? We're talking about getting trust from people. And once they have that owner set, you can start doing things like defining what is the threat. What could happen if this particular item was exploited? And then the vulnerability is what could cause it. So if we're talking about like privilege escalation being the risk, local administrators could cause privilege escalation. So that is the vulnerability. And then controls, what can you do to prevent that risk? Once you have those categorized, then I would say you'd start saying, well, what is the impact for how bad could that be? Like, is this thing going to take down a web server, or is it going to own my entire domain? Like, how bad is it? And this is kind of subjective. You get to classify this how you like. Risk is more, how likely is that to happen? Like, sure, if this happened, everything could break, but the likelihood of it happening is pretty small because of these controls we have in place. So it might be a low likelihood, but a high impact, right? And then the last is complexity. This is where you think of, if I needed to implement this mitigation technique, how hard would it be? How much time and resources, product solutions, or whatever it might take to do, how complex is it to deploy? And with those three metrics, you can start building your priority. You can say, this one is a high impact, it's very likely, but it's super easy to fix. That's priority number one, because you can just do it and fix a big problem, right? And this will help you set deadlines. It will help you set the order of things and start getting the right people in place so you can start working on these things. This is probably the most controversial slide in the deck, because the idea is that you might need to prove that that risk is real. And I'm not saying you should go rogue in your organization and just start hacking all the things because it's fun. This is actually very dangerous to do if you don't think about it. But you might find yourself in a situation where you need to prove that this risk is real. And when you do that, you want to record what you did. But you have to remember to not do any harm here. There are other tips that you want to go through and make sure that you basically get some permission from whoever you might have to report to say, hey, I think I need to do this. This is what I want to try to show the risk. It shouldn't do anything because you know the bounds of what you're going to work in. But you might even go so far as to hire a pen tester. I'm not a pen tester. Is anybody a pen tester in here? These guys, you can hire these guys to come in and help you figure out what's wrong, right? And they can prove it for you. And if you are going to do some social experiments, try and trick somebody into changing your passwords, don't go in there and say, hey, I'm Joe from the IT department, and I want you to change the boss's password, and then say, ha-ha, I tricked you. It doesn't work like that. You're trying to not use internal stuff, right? You need to use an outside source. Get your spouse to do it or something. And then if you can say, yeah, my wife just called in and said that, hey, I needed to change my husband's password because he's sick or something, and they actually do it, like, that's bad, right? They shouldn't be able to do that. But there's risks doing the proof. There's real, tangible, actual risks in doing this proof. So I'm just trying to over-accentuate that you need to make sure that what you're doing isn't going to get you in trouble. Because think about, like, if you work in healthcare or something and you do this risk test and you do something wrong, not only could someone get mad at you, but, like, someone might die, right? So don't do something without really thinking about it first. But there are some real benefits to doing this. First, it really gets people's attention when you can say, hey, I just got the boss's password, and it was really easy because I just made a phone call with a crying baby in the background. But it also gets buy-in, right? If people say, yes, that risk is real, I also know it's real because you actually did it. And it makes security real and real cool because, like, how did you do that? That curiosity gets people going and they want to dig into it with you. And you say, yeah, this was a problem. This is what I did. This is how we can fix it. And they say, okay, what does that take to do? And then you start that process. Once you get to whatever the goal was, you need to make this list of what you got, how you got it, and what went wrong so that you could get it. This last line here about identifying who's responsible for what went wrong is not about placing blame on someone. Again, we're not trying to vilify somebody inside the organization. What you want to do is find out who manages that component that would have prevented this exploit and really collaborate with them. You team up with them and say, so we did this thing, and if we had this in place, it would have stopped it. Do you know why that's not in place? I tell you, most of the time, they know that. And they will say, yes, I know, but, and the reasons are budget, time, responsibility, approval, all those sorts of things. But if you can demonstrate that this is actually a risk, and that person says, yes, I know, and I've been telling you for so long, can we please finally do something about it? That might be the thing that gets you over the hump sometimes. When you're building up this, once you've done this proof, then you really need to define the remediation objectives. What can you do to repair that or prevent that in the future? And then this will allow you to start making a project, something that has a scope, it has a timeline, it has resources assigned, and actually get the process done. Because I go to places that you can't just, like, have one guy just go do something because he feels like it, right? You gotta go through the chain. And then at the end of it, you have to test it again. You have to make sure that what you did to remediate it, in fact, did. And just like water going down the hill, right? You hit that thing that you stopped it, look for the way around it, and then you can go back again, and you basically do this loop where you can define what the concern is, prove that it's a risk, exploit it, and get the proof, and then go back again. And this will allow you to start making those incremental changes without having to, I hate the phrase boil the ocean, but do it all at once. Right? We don't want to go through and make a master cybersecurity plan of the organization that's a 3-year deployment. People want to see tangible and incremental changes, and that's largely what I'm talking about here. So before I go into the attacks list, does anybody have any questions on that? You can feel free to talk and ask me at any point here. Yes?
Yeah, how do you suggest getting C-level executives management to buy in?
How do you get C-level executives and management to buy into that? Well, depending on your position in the company, they might be the direct person that you go to with that plan. If you take out the component about proving it, I think that the entire set in there is very palatable, and most organizations are ready to do the identify and protect, detect, respond. Those kinds of tasks companies are ready to do. We actually do those kinds of engagement with the customers right now. We have them calling us and scheduling workshops to go through that kind of discussion now. We don't, as an organization, go through and do penetration testing, so we don't go through and say, we're going to prove that we can hack our way in. We bring in people like you guys to come in and do that. But then we work with doing the next steps, which is the remediation tasks. But when it comes to doing things like the proving it, you can choose things that are not terribly risky, right? I'm not saying that you should go prove that you can hack your SQL servers and steal all the data and put it on Pastebin or something. What I'm talking about more is sometimes the process change. Like one of the examples that we had is it was terribly easy for somebody to just walk into our office with a package, go right past everybody and sit down at the HR lady's desk. Like, why is that okay? That is not okay. Because once you get physical access to the machines, like we all know the game's over at that point, right? So we need to make sure that's not okay. And that's a cultural thing where we need to involve the HR department. Sometimes it involves marketing, where we can get the message out to the organization about, being suspicious and being okay with saying, hey, what are you doing here? I don't know who you are. You're not the HR person. And if they get that suspicion of something wrong, do members of the organization know what to do, who to go to, what to ask? And that oftentimes is step one. And once you start that up, you can start doing things like phishing campaigns against yourself so that you get people to start questioning and being able and okay with questioning. So many times I talk to organizations about security, and their first thought is like, these people are clicking on these emails like a bunch of idiots. They're just clicking on everything. We need to stop it. And every time they click on something, I'm going to write them up. That's not going to work. I mean, if you're just going to tell me I'm a dummy every time I do something wrong, I'm just not going to tell you when I do something wrong. And so if you can make it so that when somebody finds something that's wrong, it says, look at this flag, right? Then you reward them for it, they become heroes, and then people get interested in, like, how did you get that? How did you find that? And it starts building that awareness. And that's more or less what we're talking about here, is starting with those sorts of things. Any other? Good. So the second half here, I want to go over some attacks that I think are the first couple that we should worry about doing some mitigation against. If you haven't heard of Praetorian, they are a company that has a red team division. They do some penetration testing, and they did this white paper study that was released a little bit ago, where they had 100 pen tests over the course of about a year, and they were doing several real-world exploits in their tests. And of course, what they found is that the majority of their exploits were all old. They were not based on zero-day attacks. These were things that had been around for a very long time, and it was basically the result of patches not being done or misconfigurations. But largely, and by far, the attacks were based or rooted in credential theft. So if we start with credentials, I mean, we're basically talking about passwords. So on one slide to talk about all the password advice and kind of in one place, I mean, we basically just want to use longer passwords for our end users for the most part. And punctuation and spaces is okay. It's all right to go ahead and just type out a sentence. The longer the password, the better. And when we start using longer passwords, the biggest feedback that we get from people is, I don't want to type that. It's so much to type all the time. as an organization who controls the access to systems in your environment, what we can start doing is give people single sign-on. Right? I mean, we're used to it inside of an enterprise, and now as we move to more web-based services, single sign-on is kind of a big deal because we go to web pages and have to type our password all the time. Well, for one, if we're using machines that are joined to like Azure AD and we're out using Office 365, which is pretty common, we can give single sign-on into those systems so that the users don't have to type their passwords as much. But for logging into their machines, they don't even have to type their password if they're using something like Windows Hello. So Windows Hello allows you to basically use gestures, pins, and biometrics to sign into the machine so the users can just sit down and it unlocks. If you need to do things like generate passwords, I mean, there's obviously password generators. Machine-generated passwords are far superior to anything that us humans can do because we use the English language, so we generate passwords based on English, and then people like Robert Reif go out there and they create algorithms to just crack our passwords based on what we're probably going to type. So if you go and use a password generator, you're going to be in much better shape. Still use something long, but just generate one. In other cases, password managers are a great solution for users, humans, to go ahead and use complex passwords without having to know or type them. I use LastPass all the time, but there's plenty of other options out there. But they allow users to go to the web portals and just right-click and sign in. Sometimes they'll automatically fill it in, but you're not saving the password in the browser. And you can access it from your mobile device, and you can access it from your machines as well. But reusing passwords is probably the worst thing you can do. If you reuse a password, particularly your work account, the users could be listed in some sort of a breach. And then when that password is out there, it shows the username and password. And if it happens to be a work domain as the username, I'm going to go to that OWA site and try and sign in, start snooping around and see what I can find. Search for VPN, get the welcome message that tells you how to get on the Wi-Fi. All of the secrets are in their inbox. And then a lot of the guidance that goes through the rest of the deck is actually under this aka.ms/password guidance site. It's got some white paper information there that'll tell you in more detail some of the rationale behind this stuff. Following through the attack kill chain, when we're talking about credentials, most of the major milestones in here are related to credentials. So if I can get a password, I can get an account, I can make my next move. So protecting credentials is a really big deal. I see pictures. Did you get your shot? All right. So attack number one, weak passwords. This is, who's surprised by this? No one. Good. Oh, you were, no. So weak passwords accounted for well over half of the attacks that Praetorian performed. And the bigger problems that we have with weak passwords and why they're pretty weak come down to things like I can't really block bad passwords in Active Directory. I can require certain complexities, but I can't say don't use pass@word. It meets the complexity requirement. We can't, when users reuse passwords, it makes it so that the passwords can be discovered, right? If they're included in a leak, like maybe they used their work credentials at Ashley Madison or something, right? That would mean that they can get into your work account now. And then things like users logging into multiple web and SaaS services, they start getting desensitized to prompts about enter username and password. You know, if you've heard of Burp Suite, you know, you can be a man in the middle and just pop a JavaScript and say, hey, why don't you sign in to, you know, Office 365 or sign into Facebook? And people go, oh yeah, I just get that. I get this all the time. And they just type it and you say thanks and move on. And simple guessing of passwords, this actually is taken out of a study that Rapid7 did, where they have a manual guessing process when they first try to do accounts. They can just say, you know, season, year, bang, and they got about 25% success rate that they're going to get it. In an organization, not a specific account, but if I want to get into an organization and I can do something like slurp an address list off of LinkedIn, I can start running against OWA logins, and I'll probably get in with something at 25% of the time of the cases that they're going. So that's a bad number. But to make matters worse, when those users' credentials are found, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to find those users on their machines with a local administrator account, and local admins are going to take you all the way to your end goal about 45% of the time if they get those credentials. So it's the weak passwords represent a really big risk. So ways that we can remediate that, again, using a password sentence, just making the password itself better, prevents things like cracking or reversing the passwords. It doesn't protect you from things like leaked passwords, but if you want to implement a better password policy, one thing is you can just make the AD policy so that it has to be longer, and then start doing things like deploy hello so they can use those longer passwords. But if you want to prevent the common and well-known passwords, you'll want to use some sort of a password management solution. So if you're using something like Office 365, you can get Azure AD Premium, which comes with a self-service password portal. It's not something to deploy, it's just a web page that they go to, and when they go to sign in, you can require users to reset their passwords, and Azure AD will first say, is this a well-known common password? And it'll say, you got to use something better than that, and it'll prevent you from using it. Multi-factor authentication for administrative activities. So your privileged accounts, when you want to do something from an administrative perspective, we can start doing things like require MFA. So there's ways that you can integrate MIM-PAM or using Azure AD's PIM service. So when you just say you want to manage your Office 365 tenant for Exchange Online or something, when you go to log in with your global admin account, you have to go and do MFA. So that way, if your credential does get leaked, you still at least have to pass MFA as well. And yes, there's a way to trick people to do that, but it does make it harder to get in, right? For remote access as well, we would want to put MFA. So if you're doing things like remote desktop or VPN, there are ways to use an NPS integration. So you can do radius authentication and use Azure MFA for auth for that. And we can also use the app proxy for taking on-prem web services or ADFS so that we can do a reverse application proxy on-prem and put MFA in front of that too. Second attack. Name resolution poisoning. This one isn't exactly talking to credentials directly, but its purpose is basically to trick the way that Windows is accessing the network. When you get connected to the network, the first thing it does is it talks to the DHCP server, and the DHCP server says, here's all the information you need to get connected. And we can use that expectation as a man in the middle to have you connect to the attacker's service, and then we can start stealing credentials or at least hashes from those machines as well. And when this happens, then it actually allows users to start accessing other systems because we can start getting on those machines and basically start doing lateral movement on that box. But the intent behind this is often to use it as a jumping point, right? When we get on that machine, that's not our end goal. Our goal is to get into something better. But being able to trick the client machines allows us to do that. So to prevent that is a little bit more complicated than changing process, but we can do some things. So on the CorpNet, we would probably want to stop things like talking to DNS externally. Your clients on network should be talking to your domain controllers to get the answers for name resolution instead of talking to the internet. And they probably have no good reason to be doing file shares through your firewall, so we can block that as well. The link local multicast name resolution, that's basically when the client is on the network and it tries to do name resolution. If the DNS server says, well, I don't know, the client might send a broadcast message out on the network to its peers and say, well, the DNS server doesn't know the answer, do you? And if I'm an attacker on the same subnet, I'll say, yeah, I totally know that. There's the answer, it's me, right? And then you get redirected to yourself. So, and the same thing is true for the NetBIOS name service. If LLMNR fails, then it will roll back and try to NetBIOS. So we want to stop these two things from happening. For the most part, we can use group policies to enact this. NetBIOS, if you actually just do it on the DHCP server, the clients on that network will not try to do NetBIOS lookups. WPAD is another one. By default, WPAD is actually blocked in DNS servers in Windows so that it will not host that record. But it doesn't mean that someone on your DHCP, someone who's like faking a DHCP server, wouldn't give this instruction across the DHCP registration to say, ask me for WPAD, then I'm going to challenge you for Kerberos authentication to get the WPAD file and then get your hash, right? So we can use a group policy for that, but we can also disable the service that actually does it. So regardless of whether or not you're getting that instruction from DHCP, we actually won't listen to that command. One caveat, though, is stopping that service also stops IP helper. So if you do any kind of IPv6 tunneling, in particular direct access, I actually have a history with direct access, so this one stood out to me. If my clients are using direct access, disabling that service doesn't actually work for them. But there are other remote access solutions they could start using too. Okay, third attack. When we talk about local administrators and pass the hash. The big problem, the reason this is a big problem is because many times I see organizations that use the same common password across all the workstations, and sometimes the same password across the servers as well. So if I can get onto a workstation as a local administrator, I can dump the administrator named account and get that hash, and then I can use that hash to connect to other systems. In fact, I can often use that to reverse it, because the passwords on there were probably set, 10 years ago or more, and passwords that were 6, 8 characters long were probably fine. Well, now they're not, right? If it's 8 characters, it's easy to do. So when they put this in their operating system deployment process, it's everywhere, and that password is more powerful than the domain administrators. And another way that this happens is oftentimes with group policy. If you go back far enough in an organization, sometimes they might have a group policy preference that actually sets that local password. So this is actually bad, because we can just slurp the group policy off the file share and use the PowerShell script to just reverse the password hash that's in the group policy preference and have the credential. And then we can access any machine in the environment. So for remediation recommendations on this, look at the way that you're using or assigning those local administrator passwords. If you want to remove that access, you want to have those passwords be different. And we can go and deploy something like LAPS, which is really just a group policy extension. You can deploy that through AD, and then the client machine, or the server for that matter, will go ahead and roll its password on every group policy update. And you can configure how complex, how long, and how frequent it should do that. It's a free thing. You just go to the TechNet gallery and download that. ATA is Advanced Threat Analytics, and it monitors activity in Active Directory. It works through this gateway and center process, where on the domain controllers or next to the domain controllers, you have a server that basically does network packet captures on the domain controllers, and then it will use that information to do analysis on what's happening on the DC, what kind of authentication requests or any other traffic that's going to the DC, and it can use that to detect things like pass the hash, pass the ticket, golden ticket, skeleton key, all that kind of stuff. And then if you want to read more about it, Microsoft does actually have a white paper that you can read that has a lot of information in it. They basically tell you how the whole thing works, but I'm sure you've seen pass the hash before. And then the fourth attack, we're talking about the last was basically passwords on disk. This is passwords in memory. So if you've heard of Mimikatz before, you've probably heard about this. The domain credentials just being stored in the plain text of the system. Again, a local administrator on that machine can just run a tool and then scrape that memory space and get the credential, not only the hash, but the actual plain text credential. So we don't even have to crack it, we just have to ask for it nicely. And then the bigger problem with that is there's oftentimes no prevention of using tools like that, especially organizations that already have a local administrator. They're not really thinking about stopping people from doing stuff, because people need to get their work done. They need to install stuff, so they let them go ahead and do this. And you really can't stop this on Windows 7 or 2012 R2 and older, because the mitigation techniques that you can do for this exist. There are patches that you can install, but to enable them, you have to flip a registry key, and the local administrator can flip a registry key. So this goes under the system hive, but a local admin can become system and just say, never mind about that, and then that mitigation goes away. So it's a bit of a preventative measure, so that it's a little harder to get in and do this, but it's not foolproof. If we look at Server 2016 and Windows 10, Credential Guard and Device Guard take that out of the equation, where local administrators don't have that kind of access. And there is actually a fifth attack, but that fifth attack is in the Praetorian white paper, so if you want to check that out, I would go to their website and look at it. They're basically talking about network segmentation there. And in the network segmentation, where you go through and make sure that you have ACLs and things to prevent access to protected areas of the network. So in recap, to kind of summarize what we talked about, to start out in doing a better job in improving security in the organization, you really have to document what it is that you're concerned about specifically, who owns it, and what you want to do about it. And then, it's not necessarily just something you're going to go posting externally about, like, look at what we're doing to improve security, right? You need to talk about it, but talk about it internally. With that list, then you can start prioritizing what you're going to do about it, figuring out, what is the likelihood and the impact of it, and start with those first. And then, your passwords are weak and puny. You want to make sure that you start making a better password policy, go through and improve the way that your passwords are configured and the way that your users can manage it. If you can do self-service password reset and MFA, you can start having longer password policy requirements. And then if the user happens to forget it, it's not a call to the help desk, right? They can just take care of it themselves. And in fact, a self-service password reset is actually a good security measure, because if the way you reset passwords is by calling the help desk and talking to a human, I mean, they're going to prey on the niceties of that person to say, oh, I really got to get this email out. I'm about to go up and present. I can't get into my machine. If you can take that equation or that out of the equation, then you're going to be in much better shape. And then again, reusing passwords is a terrible idea. Password managers and generators you should really look at. And there's a lot to go through when it comes to improving security. So it's a good idea to get help both internally and externally. That is something that we do at Concurrency. But if you like this format of doing presentations, we do a lot of these kinds of things. The next one we're doing is actually on IoT at Potawatomi. So if you like gambling and and you like booze, we do that at Potawatomi. That's recorded. I didn't say that, but you're welcome to join us for that. And if you want to get a copy of this deck, you can go ahead and just email me with the subject "naked" at CypherCon, and I will automatically email it to you. It's not going on a list. I'm not giving it to our marketing guys. I just have a rule set up on my mailbox. I will just send it right to you. If you wanted to get some help with doing a security assessment, that is one of the things that we do, where we come in for 2 or 3 days and we talk to all the different people in your organization, ranging from, the C-level people, the IT people, marketing, and whoever has a stake in security, and work with them to build that backlog and get you going. And then we also did take the NIST cybersecurity framework and basically create a map that says, have you seen that spreadsheet on the NIST framework? We basically took that spreadsheet and we correlated the different products and solutions and services that you might use to implement those particular recommendations. And that comes with a white paper that talks about the digital transformation too. So with that, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask. Thanks.